Grants kickoff. Oh,
So sorry, Chris. Now you're good to go.
okay. Should I keep going? Okay. So this is the grants kickoff, celebrating 29 years of collective giving in Washington State. My name is Chris Kominishi, Chair of the Board of Directors and longtime Grants Committee member. So this is one of my favorite events of the year. It's so wonderful to see your faces, familiar ones and new ones too. So I'd like to thank everyone who makes this work possible, the grants leadership team, Aviva Stamfer, Grants Program Director, Maria Colby-Wolf, our CEO, and the entire staff team, the work group leaders and committee members, the grantee organizations, past, present, and future, the communities they represent, and of course, all Washington Women's Foundation members. So thank you for your support and thank you for being here. I'd like to frame our time together today with the acknowledgement that we are gathered on a stolen and unceded homeland within the context of broken treaties and unresolved harms to Indigenous peoples. Here in Seattle, we are on the land of the Duwamish people and of the Coast Salish, the Stillaguamish, the Duwamish, the Muckleshoot, and the Suquamish, who have made and continue to make their homes around the magnificent Salish Sea and in the shadow of the great mountain Tahoma. We must also recognize that we live, work, play, and learn in a nation and a state of great wealth, a nation with wealth created by the subjugation and exploitation of African peoples brought to this land through chattel slavery, a state with wealth that stands indebted to exploited Chinese immigrants who built the railroads, to Japanese Americans whose livelihoods were stolen in the internment camps of World War II, and to immigrant and migrant workers who, to this day, labor in the rich fields and farms across our prosperous state. We honor and uplift here today the original stewards of this land, original Indigenous stewards of this land, the forced contributions from generations of Africans, and the exploited labor of immigrants and migrant workers yesterday and today. As we think here today, I ask you to acknowledge the stolen land and stolen labor and recognize that the impact of these wrongs reverberates and in many cases is still being perpetuated into our present day. It's been 6 years since the foundation started its strategic plan, also known as our journey. Our plan was made to counteract systems that disproportionately impact people based on race and gender identity. We recognize that there's more work to be done. Each grant cycle is an opportunity for us to live our values and to move a little further along in our journey. I'll share a few slides about our approach, which is rooted in trust-based philanthropy and in our organization's values. All right. Okay, so first, a definition of trust-based philanthropy, which I will give you a minute to read there. Trust-based philanthropy recognizes the power imbalance between funder and nonprofit. This trust-based philanthropy is a worldwide movement. A lot of funders of all sizes and types are doing this, including many leading Pacific Northwest funders, and including us. Trust-based philanthropy is interwoven into the work throughout the Washington Women's Foundation, in our thinking, our approach, and in our committees, programs, and events. So trust works in many directions. Our grant criteria is designed to attract community-based organizations. We want to trust organizations and honor their placement and work in the community. We also want to be trusted as a funder that we will do what we say. And finally, we want to trust ourselves. There are many right decisions and many ways to arrive at those decisions. So Aviva has sent us more information about trust-based philanthropy. So please take a look when you get a chance. All right, here are Washington Women's Foundation values. We have a lot of values. These are, again, rooted in our strategic plan, started 6 years ago. You've likely seen these before. And all of them are great and important, but for today's purpose, I will talk about 3 of them. which closely relate to our grant making work. So the first is share power. Trust-based philanthropy says that the people closest to the issues are best positioned to address those issues, and that we as the funder take on the labor of doing the homework and streamlining the processes. Sharing power also means sharing responsibility. Sometimes we may review an organization and feel it hadn't grown as much over time, or that funding is lacking. And yet we know that less than 2% of total philanthropy has gone to community-based organizations led by people of color. So we know that investments build over time, and disinvestments also have consequences over time. So next, we have embrace discomfort. In the work groups, we will be discussing complex social issues through the lens of race and gender. And I acknowledge these are not easy conversations, and thank you for leaning into them. Some of the community-based approaches in the LOIs, the letter of interest, may feel different or unfamiliar. And at the same time, we recognize that the LOIs are coming from those who are most impacted by the issues. So really, we're all working towards the same goal. We as members want to be thoughtful stewards of the dollars. The organizations are also in it for the long run. They know that these are deeply entrenched issues. And every grant maker, including us, is funding the future. We accept a bit of the unknown. And in our 29 years of grant making, we've never gone wrong before. So finally, we have support and celebrate one another. It's a joy to be able to do this work alongside all of you. We will have robust conversations, differing opinions, and learning together. Let's extend the spirit of support to the grant committee, staff team, organizations who apply, the communities they represent, and so on. We're all part of the same nonprofit ecosystem. So that concludes my slides. Each of you will find your own versions of sharing power, embracing discomfort, and supporting one another. My role here was to set some context and give some examples. This is our third year of collective grants, and we continue to listen, learn, and move forward. That's who we are. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, my friend, fellow board colleague and member, and former Grants Committee Chair, Sue Bennett, who will continue the conversation on supporting one another. Thank you, and take it away, Sue.
Thanks, Chris. That was a great way to start our meeting. Welcome, everybody. So good to see all of your lovely faces today. I'm Sue Bennett, and I am chairing a relatively newly formed group called the Community Resource Group. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how we came to be. The bottom line is that we have created a set of norms, community norms, for how we aspire to operate as a community. And I know you've all been part of groups before. This is really a best practice for any group that meets together over a period of time, that we are clear about the way in which we want to work together, what our expectations are, and how we can talk about things when things don't go as expected. So how did this come to be? Our strategic plan a number of years ago calls for a commitment to creating a culture of inclusion. But what does that mean? How do we create it? And how can we work together in an inclusive way when we're such a diverse group? So the board formed a membership task force, and that included people from the broader membership to take a look at how we might develop some norms. This group developed norms. They ran them by the members. The board approved these community norms in 2022, and we piloted them last year in 2023. Then in the fall of 2023, we made a few adjustments, and they were approved again by the board. And you now all have this really lovely document, the Washington Women's Foundation Community Norms, about ways that we aspire to be together so that we can create a community where we all belong. The other thing the membership task force did is they recommended that there be a group of board members that could support staff, members, community folks, volunteers, as we seek to implement these norms and if and when the inevitable rocky, bumpy times happen when we're working together. So thanks to Ann Kumasaka, who was the first chair of the Community Resource Group. I'm the chair this year. And our goal is to support you. As Chris said, we're a learning organization. We're all learning, me included. And this group is here to help all of us live by these community agreements and to respond and repair when we might have different and difficult interactions. We all want to create community and belonging, and this group in particular is here to support that. So please reach out to me if you have questions. I look forward to getting to know you in this coming year, and that is it from me. I am turning it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for Chris for your leadership and Sue for your leadership as well. My name is Catherine, and I have the honor of being the chair of the collective grants this year. On behalf of the grants leadership team, past chair Alyssa and vice chair Bobby, I want to welcome you all to the 2024 collective grants kickoff. Thank you for joining us and committing your time and energy to participating in collective grants. And a special welcome to those of you who are joining us and participating for the first time. The grant process might seem overwhelming at first, but we have many experienced members to partner with you and help you along the way. We hope it will be a rewarding experience of deep learning and understanding of issues and possible solutions to reduce disparities and inequities based on race and gender identity. And also, we hope that you will join and build some great relationships with your work group members along the way. I know many of us have really loved connecting with each other over the years and continuing to connect in years ahead. Before we dive in, we wanted to start with an icebreaker to get to know who's in the room. The icebreaker question is up on the screen, and we're going to be using the Mentimeter again, which is the link should be in the chat. And the question is, what are you most looking forward to with the Collective Grant Committee this year? And there it is in the chat. Impact, connection, sisterhood. I love that. Networking, building community, learning about grantees. This is great. Community, connecting with members, inspiration. I think that inspiration is a great word for this. New people. I think we have a lot of new people joining us this year in this process. So that is incredibly exciting. Meeting, Zoom meetings, I'm sure you mean. Impact. I think the impact is a shared impact, which is one of my favorite things about this. We are impacted and the organizations are impacted. Collaboration, connection, continuing, contributing. Those are all wonderful. But learning is right there in the middle. And I think that that is something that is pretty much a guaranteed part of this process. And it's not just about the organizations, it's about the issues, it's about the deeper issues that affect our community. And I think that that is something that we all will have as a huge benefit to ourselves and to each other as we go through this process. All right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your answers with us. This is great. It's a great collection of thoughts as we kick off the process this year. I really appreciate it. Now we're going to go through an overview of the collective grants process before diving deeper into the specific LOI review. As you all know, the 2024 funding areas are, this is last year, so I'm going to give you this year, housing and hunger, law, justice, and incarceration, and arts and community culture. For each theme, we have a more specific priority to focus our learning and grant making. To identify these priorities, we had our annual convening in September, where we heard from a panel of speakers, including community leaders and nonprofit directors, to help educate the WWF community on the most pressing concerns within those annual themes. It was a remarkable and informative day. We then surveyed the Washington Women Foundation community, including members, nonprofits, and other interested parties, and asked them for their suggestions on the most critical priorities for each theme. From that survey, staff put together the slate of the most common suggestions, and members voted to select the priorities that you see or will see ahead of you. This year's priorities are expanding access to arts in schools, where we are interested in investing in the integration of arts in school settings and expanding access to arts for the students in grades K through 12. We want to learn more about the benefits of and barriers to arts in education in Washington State, as well as the impact of expanded access to arts in a K-12 school setting. Mental health and housing. We are revisiting this critical issue this year in the hopes of honing our understanding of how organizations work in this arena, as well as how they tackle this persistent issue. So we have refined our definition in the hopes of really being able to refine our thinking as we approach this issue this year. We are interested in investing in culturally relevant mental health and addiction recovery services for people who lack stable housing, including, sorry, I just lost my screen there, including those organizations with counseling staff or those who work with a network of external providers. We want to learn more about the systematic intersections of housing instability and mental health, including addiction. In re-entry support, we are interested in investing in the specific types of support that individuals leaving incarceration need in order to thrive. We want to learn more about the unique challenges individuals leaving incarceration face and how re-entry support can assist them holistically in this transition, in turn improving their experiences and reducing recidivism. We have 3 work groups, each assigned to one of these themes. The collective grants process consists of 3 phases, though not all of you will participate in all 3 phases. Phase 1 is kicking off today, which is the LOI review. Each of the 3 work groups will review the LOIs submitted by the organizations in their area and will select up to 10 LOIs for their theme and priority, for a total of 30 that will move forward to phase 2, the research phase. All 30 of the organizations that move forward to the research phase will receive a small grant to compensate them for their time of either $1,500 or $3,000 for those who participate in conversations but don't move all the way to the ballot. After the LOI review, phase 2 is the research phase. We will get together again in early March for a session on how to research a nonprofit that will cover this phase in detail. One of the big changes with the grant refresh 2 years ago was that you will be doing your own research on the nonprofits that move forward instead of reviewing proposals submitted by them. While we will ask organizations to help direct us in our research so we don't miss anything important, we do not ask them for formal proposals. We feel that this approach is aligned with our trust-based philanthropy values, and taking on the work of learning more about the organizations ourselves has really proven to be an enriching and educational process. Each work group in the research phase will choose then 5 organizations for a total of 15 to move forward to the conversation phase. In the past, one had to participate in either the LOI or the research phases in order to participate in conversations. Now, if you want to, you can commit to just reviewing all the materials and then participate in conversation phase only. We've also condensed the timetable for this phase, so there's only one conversation phase meeting. In April, we'll have a session on how to conduct effective conversations before we meet with the organizations. The conversations phase is a really wonderful opportunity for us to connect with the nonprofits for a meaningful dialogue and mutual understanding. Work groups will share their learnings from the conversations and select 2 of the 5 organizations to move forward to the final ballot. Grant committee members who aren't able to participate in a conversation may still participate in the voting on those final 2 if they commit to watching the recordings of all 5 conversations. So the conversations phase has really opened up to more participation of both grant committee members who are new to that phase and also everyone being able to vote. All 6 finalists are offered a $5,000 leadership and self-care grant. This is the only restricted grant that is offered at Washington Women's Foundation, and it comes from our desire to invest in the capacity of the nonprofits. These grants are intended to support leadership, which might be the ED or emerging leaders in the organizations as they work on personal or organizational capacity building, training, and or self-care. Again, if this grant is restricted, so if organizations feel that it is more of a burden to take it than a benefit, they are able to turn it down. In May, our membership will vote on the finalists, and the results will be revealed in June at our grant award celebration. The top voted organizations will each receive $100,000, with the remaining receiving $25,000 each. This wraps up our review of the collective grant process. I know that was a lot of information. The guide to collective grants that Aviva will be sharing with you will have all the info and more, and it's going to be a great resource for you throughout this entire process. As you go through this process, you will also have the great support of your work group leaders. They are experienced and committed to our equity-focused philanthropy. We are so grateful for our slate of leaders this year. I'm thrilled to introduce our incredible team, Jean Carter and Ingrid Nelson, working in expanded access to arts and schools. I'm advising this group. Mental health and housing with Glenn Colwell and Joyce Schulte, advised by Bobby Conti, and reentry support with Sharon Hamill and Stacy Clausen, advised by Alyssa So. We are so excited for the year ahead. Thank you again for your significant commitment of time and talent. We really hope that you will enjoy and be inspired by the experience ahead. It is hard work, but the benefits, I think, really outweigh any time that we all invest. Now I'll hand it over to Aviva, who will tell us more about what to expect in the first day's LOI review. Thank you, Aviva.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that great overview and sharing a little bit of your excitement, which I share. For my portion of today's meeting, I'm going to dive into the LOI phase. Before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to pause screen sharing and take off my spotlight so that I can ask you all a question and you can see each other when you answer. The question is, who here has done collective grants before? Can you just wave your hand? Okay, so I'm doing that so that you see some of the other resources available to you newbies. We have a lot of amazing, experienced collective grants participants here who are coming back for the 3rd or 4th or 5th time. So I hope you'll really lean on each other and support each other as you go through the process here. In addition to, of course, the incredible leaders that we are so grateful for stepping into work group leader roles and as advisors on the grants leadership team. Catherine already mentioned the guide to collective grants. We mention it so much because it really does have everything you need all in one place. It's designed to support you in that way. And I did send it out already, and it will be included in a Dropbox folder that you'll receive in my follow-up email, which is sort of your go-to spot for everything related to collective grants. Did I see a question? I thought I saw a hand raised. Before I move on, I want to make sure to, if there is a question at this point, we can answer them. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to get back to the screen share and into LOIs. All right. So the LOI phase, oops, I went too fast. which Catherine already mentioned, is really where we get started. And it kicks off in a couple, well, it kicks off today, but your first meeting as a group will be in a couple weeks and will run through mid-February. We will, just so you know, LOI stands for a letter of inquiry, and they are short descriptions of each organization. That's what you'll focus your attention on reading through and evaluating together as a team. So you'll pick the top 10, as Catherine mentioned, and we ask you to miss no more than one meeting during this phase, simply because you'd miss a lot of information and discussion to be able to vote knowledgeably. Attendance is also important for balancing the shared workload. Your work group leaders, once we get the roster finalized today, will be sending out assignments of which LOIs you'll be primarily responsible for. And we do ask that you are present to vote. Like last year, we'll have 4 meetings in this phase with the intention that the extra time can be used to learn together about the priority area, discuss relevant definitions, and develop shared understanding that will support your collective decision-making. Work group leaders have the option to decide how they want to use that time, either one separate meeting that's fully devoted to diving into the topic together, or setting aside time at the beginning or during the meeting, each of the 4 meetings, to really have that shared understanding and discussion together. We also have an incredible 101 series that the other Catherine, as I call her, on staff here, our events and programs manager, has put together these fantastic series of panels, one for each of our priority areas. And if you haven't yet registered for them, I do highly encourage that you sign up for at least the work group that you're serving on, if not all 3, because they're all really going to be fantastic. She's found some really great speakers for us. The final note here before I move on to the next slide is just that voting results, we do ask you to keep confidential until we make the public announcement, which usually happens on our blog. And that's just so that I have time to notify all the organizations before they find out about it out in the world. So next I want to spend some time talking about our grant criteria. So you have it up here on the screen. I know it's kind of probably small, it's a lot of words, but you guessed it, it's also in the guide to grants. And I want to talk through it a little bit because it really does underscore all of our work here together on collective grants. And I know that all 3 of our speakers have already touched into this core piece, which is around increasing equity and reducing disparities. Really guides us in all we do. And this was implemented initially in 2019. And we learned a lot since then and have made some changes, not recently. The first couple of years, we had some tweaks based on feedback from nonprofits and members who said this could be clearer. I don't know what that means. And we feel really good about where we've gotten so far. And if you're curious about the changes that have been made, you can always take a look at our old blog posts to see the changes we've made from year to year. A couple definitions for you. There are more in the guide. We use the Philanthropy Northwest definition of equity, which is that equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's identity no longer predicted how one fared in life. And we define disparities as differences in life experiences, life outcomes, and the distribution of society's benefits and burdens determined by a person's race, gender identity, and or other characteristics historically linked to discrimination and or exclusion. This criteria you see on the slide will be your guiding post. It's there in the guide, as well as a full list of definitions to help us build that shared understanding. Any questions on the criteria before we move on? And you can use the raise hand feature, or you can also just unmute. And I will also take a look at the chat to make sure I'm not missing anything there. There's a lot of different screens going at the same time. Oh, there was a question about the priority sessions. Yes, the priority sessions will be recorded and shared out if you're unable to attend. Thank you for that question. It's a great idea. One of the other resources I'll share are some tips around the grant criteria. So if you're new to this grant criteria, have no fear. We have lots of resources to help you apply it, including all the other lovely people here in this Zoom room. The next thing I want to take a moment to talk about here is general operating support. So at Washington Women's Foundation, we offer unrestricted funding, making grants for the general operating support, which support the overall mission of the organization. And we do this because we want to encourage innovation, creativity, nimbleness, which is all done best with flexible funding. This type of funding also shows confidence in the leadership of the organization. It truly sends a message to the organization that we respect them, we know that they are the experts at their work, and they know most the needs of their community and how to best address those needs. These types of grants are rare in the foundation world. We've been doing them for a long time now, and definitely things are starting to shift. We're excited to see that, but they still remain rare, believe it or not. And we do this because we also know that organizations can use this type of funding for anything that we might have funded with a capital campaign grant or a program grant in the past, but we don't focus our inquiry really on how they plan to use the funds. Instead, our goal is to learn about and support the organization as a whole. We know that it can be challenging to shift your mindset from what are you planning to do with the funds instead to how can we support your organization? But our goal really is to operate from that place of trust that Chris really started us off with and putting into practice these ideals of trust-based philanthropy. And we found over time that we actually learn so much more about these organizations when we start with that lens of planning to support them with general operating support. Next, a quick note on eligibility. You might be wondering what's been, who's looked at these organizations' applications so far? What are we looking for? And we do have a pre-screen process. So the work group leaders and their advisors have done an initial pre-screen of all the submitted LOIs in the priority to look for things around eligibility, but also to try to get the number down to a more manageable set so that you're not working with a really long list of LOIs. And they really do use that grant criteria for that initial lens. You will have access to all the LOIs that are submitted. And so I do encourage you, if you want to take a look through that full list, if you see an organization that you think is worthy of further consideration but was pre-screened out, please do bring that to your work group leaders and they can fit time in for review of that organization. So the eligibility piece you see up here on the screen, if you do find an organization that you think isn't eligible for any reason that you see up here on the screen, please do highlight that for your work group leaders as well. I wanted to make a note here around fiscal sponsorship. You'll see that on the first bullet point. You might see organizations that have a fiscal sponsor rather than having their own 501c3 status this year. And this is not an indication that an organization is less capable, less sophisticated, or less worthy of our funding. Some groups retain a fiscal sponsor for a long time. Actually, Washington Women's Foundation was one of them. And some organizations, including those that are tax exempt, find that using a fiscal sponsor to outsource administrative responsibilities, whether that means back office tasks or stuff related to fundraising and disbursement of funds, that's actually the right business model for them. So I just wanted to highlight that for you as you go through. You might see that and to have that in your mind as you think about your evaluation. Of course, we're funding organizations that have a presence in Washington State. And what that means for us is if it's a national organization that has an office in Washington State, with producing work in Washington State, providing services in Washington State, we would just make sure that our funding would go to support the Washington State work. We don't fund organizations that discriminate on any basis, and we don't fund organizations that serve exclusively sectarian purposes or endowments, individuals, or sponsorships. All right, so now moving on to the letter of inquiry itself. So a letter of inquiry, as I said before, is really a brief introduction to the organization. You'll see on the slide here the 4 questions that we ask organizations to answer in the narrative portion of the LOI. You'll also have some basic information like their website, their leadership, their budget, who they serve, and a little bit around their geography. But those are pretty straightforward questions, and really what we get into, the meat of it all, is in these 4 narrative questions. We deliberately do keep our first step of the process short so that it's not a huge hurdle or investment of time for an organization. And what that means is that it's not a complete picture. You're not going to learn everything you might want to learn about an organization for their LOI. It's not a formal application, and it's really a chance for us to do that initial evaluation and decide, Is it time to learn more? Do we want to bring them forward to the research phase where we can really dive in and learn a lot more about an organization? So when it comes to reviewing LOIs, I encourage you to approach it with curiosity and an open mind. I think you will feel more successful if you think about it not as, I have to eliminate so many nonprofits. Oh, no. And instead thinking about letting the ones that really have that strong fit with the criteria shine. And keeping that focus will help you do the work. It's hard sometimes when you find these amazing organizations, maybe someone that's new to you, maybe an organization you've known a long time, and you say, wait a minute, they're doing really great work. But unfortunately, they don't fit the criteria. That can be really challenging. And that's a great time to lean on your work group and say, I'm struggling with this. I'm feeling really drawn to this work, but I don't actually think it's a good fit. And really keeping to that criteria helps us have a strong sense of what we're looking for. I encourage you not to let the past dictate the present. Take a clean slate from last year or year before. Organizations are constantly evolving and changing and growing. And so try to keep that open mind related to that as well. Importantly, I wanted to share that grantees no longer have to wait to reapply. So you might see some familiar names and that shouldn't discount them from your consideration. During the first phase, this LOI phase, we're not asking you to do in-depth research on all of these organizations. There are too many to do in-depth research on, really. You, of course, can look at the website, which will be linked in that form, to become more familiar with them. But don't feel like you need to really dive in or look at their financial documents or their 990 or anything like that. We have plenty of time for that in the research phase, and really do stay focused on what they provide in the LOI itself. We also ask that you don't get in touch with the organization directly, don't call them or go visit their office, mostly because we're trying to provide a seamless experience for them. They have one point of contact throughout the grant process, and that's me, of course, except for the conversation phase, which is when you get to really have great conversations with them directly. Okay, so we're going to shift gears and I'm going to put you all to work. We're going to review a sample LOI that was submitted many years ago so you can practice applying the grant criteria. If you've done this before in years past, I might call on you or I might ask you to wait a little bit to see if someone who's just getting a chance to practice their criteria can chime in first. So we took out identifying characteristics here, but if you figure out what this organization is, just keep that to yourself so that we can keep it confidential. Okay, so this LOI here, I'll read the text out for you, and I want you to think about that first criteria piece around, and I'll read that for you if that's helpful. Just gotta find it with my notes, which is around an organization that's focused on providing services to people affected by inequity due to race and or gender identity. Okay, so here is what we have to work with. The organization is a cohort-based program that utilizes research-based strategies to study and promote college retention and graduation among men of color. Research shows longstanding racial inequities in educational outcomes. From early childhood to graduate education, men of color graduate at lower rates than their white and female counterparts. The organization provides multiple pathways for cohorts to access networks and resources that will advance their success, focusing on academic, civic, and leadership opportunities. The cohort experience, including curriculum and mentorship, spans each student's entire journey. Okay, so is there anything that stands out to you as a great fit with that first element of the criteria here? And please do raise your hand or unmute and tell me what you think. It's not a trick question, I promise. I am missing anyone in the chat. Let me take a look here. Nope. Oh, Adrian, yes, please go ahead.
Well, we know that they expressly focus on men of color. So that's a clear tip off that they are focused on one of our criteria.
Absolutely, Adrian. And that's exactly what I wanted to highlight here is really sometimes it's hard to know what specific community an organization is serving. Not here, they're really clear about it, and they're clear about why as well, which is really helpful to draw that connection about the inequities that they're trying to address. Absolutely. And the other thing I'll add here is one of the things we've started to look at as we look at the criteria last couple of years is really around intentionality. Catherine Gelbin and I talk about this a lot, like, well, do they happen to serve this community? Or are they really building a program, an organization that is intentionally designed to serve a community and is built around input from them and around any specific needs they might have? And to me, when you look at this example, you do see intentionality in that design. Okay, we're going to go on to another one. Get to stretch your brains a little bit here. Our second piece here says to ensure that communities being served are visibly leading, we include students on our steering committee, letting students guide the organization's mission, principles, and direction. The staff and board is comprised entirely of people of color with expertise supporting underrepresented college students. To ensure ongoing accountability to our cohorts and their communities, we conduct ongoing formative assessments to continually interrogate and improve our services and interventions. Students offer feedback through surveys every quarter and through individual interviews once a year, and staff use that feedback to inform future curricular and program development. So what I want to ask here is what stands out to you about their potential connection to the second part of the criteria, which is really focused on being accountable to the people being served. Okay, who's feeling brave, wants to join in? Thank you, Adrian, for breaking the ice. Go ahead, Ingrid.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's all sorts of good stuff that pops in these paragraphs. First of all, that the students are actually on the steering committee. The students guide the mission. The staff and board is comprised almost entirely of people of color. They do the ongoing assessments with the students. So it really starts from forming the programs, managing the programs, making sure the programs are working effectively. They've got their community involved the entire way through the process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ingrid. Well said. Anne, did I see your hand as well? Anything to add?
I would also add that they have a feedback loop, which is very important. So they're targeting the students have feedback and individual interviews, and staff use that feedback to help inform what they're going to continue doing or not doing.
Well put. Thank you both. I think you really highlighted what I wanted to talk through here. It's clear that this organization is really led by the people being served. There's expertise all the way through, and that feedback loop that Anne talked about is clear, not in just how they collect the feedback, but how they implement it as well. So this type of answer here helps us understand that this is a really culturally responsive organization that deeply understands both the issue that the community is facing and wants to stay in touch and stay up to date as things shift and evolve. Okay, we're going to do one more. Let's see, here we go. So since 2016, the organization has recruited 3 freshman cohorts of undergraduate men of color. Data from the first 2 cohorts show that grade point averages are higher for students in the cohort than comparison groups, and qualitative data also documents how their participation has increased their campus engagement, access to student leadership opportunities, and sense of belonging. As one of our 4 developmental areas, developing each undergraduate student's leadership capacity is an important measure of success and woven into the program's curriculum. Okay, so this is really targeted to the criteria number 4, which is around being able to demonstrate how they reduce disparities and or achieve more equitable outcomes. So who wants to chime in? I would love to have someone who is new to grants and feeling excited about our criteria to chime in and share their thoughts. No wrong answers.
I'll go.
All right. Thank you, Sandy.
It seems like they have clear, I mean, they're doing comparison to people not in the cohorts. They're providing clear data of how their intervention is working compared to no intervention at all.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly it. And I think, there's so many different ways to measure success. This is clearly one of them. One of the things I like here is there's qualitative and quantitative data that they're talking through here. Sometimes you'll see that, sometimes you'll see one, sometimes you'll see the other. Might be hard to sort of decipher. But one of the things that we look for really is how do we know that they're really good at what they're doing, right? And this is one way to do that. Anyone else want to chime in on this one before we move on? Heidi, go ahead.
I just want to say that sometimes this is the criteria that is hardest to find, and often I think you have to have a little trust in the organization, because the newer they are to what they're trying to do, the less data they have to actually bolster their success. And sometimes you have to have a little more, I don't know, read between the lines, or just get a sense that they're on the right track, rather than having some real hard data to back it up.
Thank you, Heidi. I so appreciate that tie back to trust, which is really where Chris grounded us in the beginning, right? And trusting an organization that might be a little bit newer might be uncomfortable, right? So this is an opportunity for you to embrace that discomfort and lean on each other for that. Yeah. And did you have something you wanted to
I
add?
just had a question about the last paragraph where they're more generic when they say developing each undergraduate student's leadership capacity is an important measure of success. So should they be more narrow on that and going back to undergraduate men of color? Or are you supposed to just pick that up since you know that this is part of that same paragraph?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Anne. I would say that you can make that assumption. That's a fair assumption to make, that since their program is focused on men of color, when they talk about undergraduate success, that's who they're talking about.
Okay.
But a good question, because sometimes it's not clear.
It isn't.
And so you can really lean on each other and say, this is how I read that. Is that how you read that? Just want to
Okay.
check and make sure. Yeah. Thank you all for diving into this exercise. And there is a document that you'll see in the Dropbox, it's just grant criteria tips is what it's called, with some additional thoughts on how you might apply this grant criteria. And for the folks who've done it for several years now, in the beginning, it can be tricky, and then you develop a sense, your own internal sense, and you can always check in with each other to help keep that understanding going. Fantastic. The last couple things I want to talk through. The first one here is around context. So in addition to the grant criteria, you might be thinking about context as you're reading these LOIs. The first thing you might notice is the variety of LOIs submitted. Even as we are focused in our priorities, you will see a real range in both types of organization, size of organization, where it's located, and even the approach it takes. Within reentry support, there are a lot of different approaches, a lot of different types of support. And so you will be, I hope, thrilled by this as it deepens your learning with each other. And you cannot always, what it means really is that you cannot always compare organizations apples to apples because they're doing such different work and in such different contexts. And that can help you when you think about context to make these considerations, to really understand each organization's particular situation and unique needs. You'll see organizations that span the spectrum of size. So that might be staff size, budget size, and in particular, small grassroots organizations, you might see that there are very few staff members wearing very many hats. And in some cases, English might not be their first language. So when you're reading through, if you get a sense that there's some grammar issues, keep that in mind. Maybe that's the context, and try to disregard that and really just hone in on what they're trying to say. We've seen some of our small grantees accomplish quite a lot, even if their team is small and their LOI maybe is not the most polished if they don't have a full development team behind them compared to what you might see in larger, more mainstream organizations. So keep that context in mind. Another piece here around geography I wanted to mention, an organization in Yakima might have a budget that would make it perhaps a small or medium-sized organization in the King County area, but they might really be the big organization in their area, especially if it's a more rural area. Additionally, the impact of our grant in more rural areas can be really different when you think about funding availability in the Puget Sound versus the east side of our state. That said, please remember that $100,000 is a large grant to any nonprofit, regardless of size. So we are not looking for a specific size of organization. We have funded multi-million-dollar massive organizations and teeny tiny $18,000 budget organizations. And our grant really does mean a lot, especially because it's unrestricted, whether it's large, small, urban, or rural. All right. I wanted to talk a bit about risk because risk is truly inherent to any funding decision, but it also comes with great reward, of course. Your task really is to identify those risks and determine whether it's an investment worth pursuing. So ask, is the potential impact really worth it? Over the years, we've seen value in funding organizations that can and sometimes do fail. So really what we're talking about is even when there's a failure of some kind, if an organization closes, everyone still learns something and organizations still have impact even in those moments. And they often use that learning to improve and share with each other so other organizations can improve. So trust the due diligence process and know that with strategic risk taking, you can make great decisions together. Some members, especially if you're new to this process, might fear, what if we make the wrong decision? And I really want to emphasize there are no wrong decisions and there also are no perfect ones. This is the power of collaborative grant making. It's really a group process and you're all reading these LOIs and conducting research and bringing your unique perspectives into the discussion. And that is the power of this work. Together, you'll really interpret the criteria and decide what moves forward and make decisions that work for you as a group. Before I move on to a little bit of a demo of our process of our tool here, Reviewer, I want to talk about the 3 C's, which are communication, confidentiality, and conflict of interest. So communication, I already mentioned earlier, we ask that you don't get in touch with organizations while they're under consideration. Confidentiality, we really want to protect the integrity of their process and show respect for the information we receive from organizations. It can be sensitive information sometimes, so we want to keep it confidential. And conflict of interest, you'll see the policy in the guide. And if you think you might have a potential conflict of interest, please do let me or your work group leaders know, and we can make sure to deal with that. That really, just to tell you what you might be looking for is if you're on the board or staff of an organization under consideration, we'd ask you to move to a different group so that you're not evaluating your own work. I'm going to move on now to Reviewer, which means I got to switch my screen share. So Reviewer is our LOI application tool. Oops, there we go. And it's how all of our organizations submit their LOIs, and it's also how you all will log in and review all of those LOIs. So later today, or tomorrow, if I don't have enough time today, you'll receive an invitation to join Reviewer. If you already have a Reviewer account, you'll still receive that email, but it'll be the same login information. You'll just have a fresh batch of LOIs in there for you. And also in addition to this quick run through here, you'll have just a 1-pager on how to use Reviewer, and they have a great support team. When you log in, this is what you'll see. I've gone ahead and logged in as Catherine Galvan. Thank you, Catherine, for the opportunity to pretend to be you. So when you log in, you'll see all of these LOIs here down here, but I want to first highlight for you a fun way for you to sort them. You'll see here a label. Oops. Why is that doing a weird thing? There we go. So let's say you are on the Housing and Hunger, Mental Health and Housing group. You can always sort through and only look at the ones that you want to review. I will probably only give you access to the ones that you need, but if you need to sort through in any other way, just know you can use the labels to do that. You can also search by name. So let's say you are looking for a specific organization, you put the name here under submission name and click search, and that'll help you find a specific organization. Once you're ready to review one, let's just review this first one here for ease. You click that blue eyeball on the left, and it'll take you to the form. You can scroll down, take a look at all their answers to all of the questions, including their mission, their budget, and their 4 narrative questions. You read through, you think, wow, this is great. You'll notice here that some of them have opted to share a little bit more about their work with women and girls. This is what we'll use for our Women and Girls grant in the fall. Of course, you can take a read through of that as well if you'd like. If you are a note taker, and that's how you like to track your thoughts in the moment, of course, take notes however you like, but I wanted to highlight for you a feature of Reviewer. You can add a note here. You just click notes on the top right and then add a note. Put whatever you like. You can keep it confidential to yourself, but if you want to share it with your work group, you can click this share with other reviewers checkbox and then click save. There is an opportunity to fill out an evaluation. This is an optional tool. It'll just ask you to rate 1 to 5. Here, I'll show you what it looks like. It'll ask you to rate 1 to 5 their alignment with the grant criteria. This is not used or tracked in any formal way. Your work group leaders might ask you to fill it out just as a way to get a sense for how how the group's feeling out about a specific organization. But it's not necessary or required as part of your individual review. Let's see, I want to make sure I talked through everything, the comment evaluation. Let's say you want to print this out because you really like a hard copy. There is a print button here. I'll warn you, they still haven't fixed it, even though I've asked them to. It's a lot of pages. So what I might recommend is actually copying and pasting information into a separate document instead of using their print function. It's just not a great print function. Later in the process, there will be attachments in the research phase, just so you know, this is where they are here on attachments. There won't be anything in there now, but for the future. And then back to form if you want to look at their responses. And how do you get back to that list of all the LOIs? Here is the back arrow button. It'll get you to that full list again. Any questions on Reviewer? I'll stop my share so I can see all of you.
Aviva, I would just add that if you click on submission name, it will alphabetize it by the organization, and that makes it a lot easier to organize the list.
Great tip, Catherine. Thank you. Okay. If you have any issues with Reviewer, whether access or trouble navigating it, please do reach out. And if it's beyond my pay grade, we will elevate it to their support team and get you sorted. Sharon, I see your hand up.
Is there any way to, like if we read the LOIs, we said we don't think that some of these belong. Is there any way to either get rid of those or to drop them to the bottom or anything like that as far as sorting?
One of the things we could explore is adding an additional label. They would have to create that label for us on the back end, so it's not a quick fix necessarily. And so if you get to that point and it's really distracting to have them all listed, do let me know and we can ask them about that. But I think that a solve in the meantime is using that search function to just get right to the one that you want to look at. Yeah. Any other questions on Reviewer or anything else that we've gone through today? Okay, make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. What we're going to shift to now is breakout rooms with your work group. If you are not sure which work group you're in or you want to switch, just stick in the main room. We do still have space. It's a pretty good distribution here. If we do have a couple spots in the expanding access to arts in schools group. So if you want to switch there, or if you are new and don't have a spot, we might ask you to join there. And we'll give you a good chunk of time in your breakout rooms just to get to know each other, start to explore the LOI phase together. And I'll be here in the main room if you have any issues. Any last questions or thoughts anyone wants to share? Oh, Ingrid.
Aviva, yeah, just a quick question. When we're done in our small group, are we coming back to the main group or should we just adjourn?
Thank you for that excellent logistical question. We will be all done. So we've given you a full hour. You might not need that full hour. Of course, you can come back into the main room and say goodbye, but you can also just exit the meeting. Yeah. And with that, I'll say just once again, my appreciation for you all showing up in this way as members of our foundation. You know, this is the core of what we do together, this grant making, this learning and discussion. And I have great confidence in this group to really make some great decisions and have a lot of fun doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. If you don't get automatically redirected to a room, I will make sure to get you sorted. Let's see, is there anyone who